As if Komodo dragons weren't OP enough as an animal. They're the largest living lizards on the planet. They can bring down wildebeest, animals many times their own size. We recently learned that they are venomous. They don't just have a gross boy bite that's filled with a bunch of bacteria. They do have venom in there. And now we found out that they have bone armor, that they have bone mail in their skin, like there's some sort of level 18 necromancer running through the arcane sanctuary on Diablo 2? Go ahead, that all checks out. Look at this image. This is crazy. This is just an image of what's inside of Komodo dragon's skin with the skeleton and the skin removed digitally. This is from Maisano et al. We know that these kinds of structures exist in other animals. They're called osteoderms, bones in skin, but we haven't seen them in Komodo dragons like this. Look at this. They have chainmail made out of bone that absorbs a lot of DPS, like you're some kind of necromancer. I already made that reference. But anyway, scientists think they don't even need this armor to fend off other predators or prey when they're biting down into that wildebeest butt. No, they speculate that they need bone armor just to protect themselves from other Komodo dragons, the only thing that could possibly puncture that bone. Just incredible. It makes me want to film a Komodo dragon nature documentary called You've Got Bone Mail. Maybe not. Hello and welcome to another edition of Because Science Footnotes, the companion show to Because Science, where I take all of your comments, questions, and corrections and I slice into them like a scientist performing an autopsy on a big old lizard with bone mail inside of its skin. And then I tell you what's coming up next on this channel. Hint, Falcon! But moving right along to the last episode of Because Science and all of your comments and questions. On the last episode, we are trying to determine legally if the Joker is criminally insane. Under current law, could the Joker use something like the insanity defense and be acquitted by that defense and then be sent off to a place like Arkham? I'm not a lawyer, but I looked at current law and I said no lawyer would probably suggest the Joker use the insanity defense because you can find many different examples of the Joker obviously knowing what he is doing is wrong and is aware of the illegality and the morality of his actions. If you want to watch the full episode, it is pinned in the YouTube comments below. But what I really want to know, and possibly object to, is what you had to say. Our first comment comes from Marius Baboy, who says he's already making his defense for the time he is getting convicted as a supervillain. Don't need a defense if you don't get caught. I mean, don't quote me on that, but it is true. And remember, kids, you don't need a criminal defense lawyer if you're never caught. And I won't represent you. My retainer is enormous. I got a lot of teeth. Lawyer jokes! Oops. The Wretched Owl has our next comment and is commenting on all of the free will stuff that I decided to lay on you in the middle of that video to try to trigger an existential crisis inside of you. They go on to say, when did you choose to be you? Which is I said. This also brings up the question of who is the you choosing who you should be. There has to be a you to make the decision for the concept of a decision to exist, but how can there be a you to make the decision if there must first be a you to make the decision, but that you can't exist before a decision is made? Exactly. I feel like I said it slightly more succinct, but I agree. TheoQ99 says, when did you decide to be you? What do you mean, man? I spent forever at the character creation menu only to end up with this spectacular mess. I can't tell how messed up you look, but if you think about it, when your parents get together, it is kind of like a character creation screen that they have no control over. Let's move this nose like this, and let's give him this hair, and move this over here. Fine. Now let's join the Institute this time instead of the Commonwealth? Those are two different games. Dang it! I feel like Brazilian Joe here is challenging me. What is Floccinaucinihilipilification? Yeah, I say that word all the time. How often do people do it? How often does the Joker do it? What about Batman? Do you do it with other people or just two other people? Is it a lonely pastime? What is the most ethical way, in your opinion, to Floccinaucinihilipilification something or someone, if at all, because grammar? The word Floccinaucinihilipilification means to attribute a worthlessness to something, to indicate that something is worthless. It's usually used as kind of like a novelty, like a word that you can impress people if you say it and you're trying to sound smart. Joe. but I guess the Joker Floccinaucinihilipilificates people all the time and values them zeroly? Does that answer your question? Sorry, I was just trying to sound smart. But the nerdiest comment at the time I'm filming this here episode I'm giving to Valerij Zisman, who says, "Hey Kyle, love the show, especially happy to see philosophy getting some love from the science folks. I'm a philosophy PhD student myself, working on the ethics of punishment. A thought on your great discussion of moral responsibility. In the philosophical debate, it's not obvious that the principle of alternate possibilities holds, like you could do something else or choose otherwise. Meaning, if you couldn't have acted otherwise or thought otherwise, you might still be morally responsible for your actions." Valerij goes on to mention that it seems like people just naturally are compatibilists, meaning that we acknowledge that some things are determined by the universe, but we still feel like we are free to choose. Like, even though some things are definitely determined, like could be determined by a supercomputer, we still feel that there is some wiggle room for choice. And I will not get all the way into exactly how I fall along that line, but for pointing out that people are naturally this way and pointing out the exact reason why I talked about this in the context of the Joker episode. You, Valerij, are indeed a super nerd. Good luck with your PhD. Pretty huge debate. But of course, I'm not always right. I thought in that episode I could do a passable Southern accent for a Southern lawyer. But I certainly cannot. So what did I get wrong last week? Only one way to find out. Sometimes dead is better. Now see here, our first correction. Nope, still can't do it. Our first correction comes from the Iron Master 99, who says the Joker knows he is in a comic, breaking the fourth wall and talking to the audience. He knows what he is doing is wrong, but he is a character, and knowing his true existence makes him super sane. Also, once the Joker was given something to make him sane, but it just made him insane because he was neither sane or sane. I do not like the super sanity argument for the Joker. It's kind of this Deadpoolian version of the Joker where he is aware that he is a comic book character, and therefore the argument is that he can remove himself from questions of being sane or insane because he knows the game. He knows that he's part of pop culture. I do not like this argument because it is just a way, it's a writing technique, and not a very clever one if you ask me, of getting out of questions of sanity and insanity, what the Joker's motivations are or not. It's a fun concept. It's a fun thing to say in internet forums, but super sanity doesn't really address anything, really. It doesn't really add much to the character as written. It may add to the character in pop culture, but as written, as a story, not so much. And even if a character was super sane in real life, that means they're definitely aware that what they're doing is wrong, and so they wouldn't be able to use the insanity defense. This is different from something like psychopathy, a psychopath, where they truly do not know right from wrong, but they know an action might be harmful. So there's a lot of distinctions here, but super sanity I do not think helps us very much. Josh the Bow has a correction who says, Kyle says, I'm not a supervillain. I'm not. If anyone knows a supervillain, it's me. But then he makes a video trying to defend a supervillain so that they do not face punishment for their crimes. No, it's not exactly what I mean. As I said in the episode, if you follow what I consider to be a more scientific view of choosing and choice and free will or not, and responsibility and criminality, that kind of thing, I do believe that certain kinds of people with certain kinds of conditions, through no fault of their own, probably should be separated from the rest of us or from society, and then possibly rehabilitated if they can be rehabilitated. But to punish them, say, to throw someone in solitary confinement for 30 days straight, which we know happens, which ruins people's minds for no other reason than they are behaving as who they are. Is that morally justifiable if they did not choose to be who they are? That's what I'm getting at. We can still have a system of criminal justice. We can still separate people from the rest of society because of their actions, but to punish them with malice or to inflict revenge or some kind of punishment that goes above and beyond separation, I do not think this view of free will really allows for that morally. It might feel like it feels good to do or feels justified, but is it? The lower you get, the more the point that you make. Our next correction comes from Roman numeral 4, who has a problem with my example of when I was trying to show you how thoughts just randomly arise in consciousness, and when I asked you to just think of a city off the top of your head. They go through what I said. Kyle, when did you choose to think of that city? Me, when you said think of that city. Kyle says, why did you think of that particular city? Me, because you said to. I think there might be a confusion here. Get behind the choice. We all are organisms that make choices. This is incontrovertible. This is what happens. The question with free will specifically is that can we choose our choice? When I ask you to focus on your thoughts and choose a city at random, and then I ask you why you chose that city or when, I'm not getting at, oh, when you told me to, that's when I thought of it. I'm getting at behind that. When did you choose to say, I'm going to think of these number of cities, and I'm going to determine this one, and I'm going to pick that one, and then I'm going to consciously decide on that one? You can never, in my view, really get behind the choices you make. And if you try to follow that all the way back, you find yourself at the very moment that you started to exist, and the chain of causality never leads to a point where you can make any real choices in life, and you have no choice in the matter. But again, I was always going to say that. Our next correction comes from Bleach Martini, who says libertarian free will, like you are describing, hasn't been the standard model of free will in philosophical literature for decades. The overwhelming majority of literature on the topic runs with the theory of compatibilism, and that the idea that whatever free will is, it must be deterministic in nature. We may not be free to choose everything about ourselves, but we are able to reflect on our decision-making process and change them through engaging with reason. This is called metacognition, and writings on the topic exist as far back as 300 BC with Aristotle. Well, Bleach Martini, don't drink it. I know that compatibilism is a theory. It's one of the theories about free will, but I am not a compatibilist. Compatibilism is to say that you know that some parts of the world, if not most parts of the world, are determined, but because of some amazing quality bestowed on pretty much just humans, and not most other things in the entire universe, red flag, we have the opportunity to reflect on the choices that we make and then change choices going forwards. If you followed me up into this point, you may see the problem. In my view, you cannot get behind this metacognition, as you say. Yes, we experience this as a visceral feeling all the time, where we just do something and then we think back, why did I do that? I will choose to do something different in the future. I've made a mistake. I will change my behavior in the future. The problem I have with compatibilism is that if something is deterministic, to me, it naturally follows that everything is deterministic. I think the free will wiggle room is just wishful thinking. Us reflecting back on our choices is really just our attention focusing down on things that we could not have chosen otherwise on, and the next thing that we do, the next thought that we think, the next word that I say, I have no more choice over than the next thought you're going to have. And you just had it. Why? When did you choose to have it? Why did I say have and not obtain in that sentence? If you try to get behind the veil of free will, you find that there's no real choice happening. This is all my opinion, and I've had this opinion for years. But look, I'm not trying to cause you to freak out. I'm just saying that you can freak out a little bit. Your life's not a lie. You live it. It's just that you're not in control of it like you feel like you are. You're more like along for the ride. Oh, wow. And I'm doing a lot of illegal stuff. But the nerdiest correction the time I'm filming this episode, I gotta give to Logan Oliver, who seems like a lawyer himself, who says, hey Kyle, love the law and weird philosophical questions. Overlap of a few of my favorite things. Keep up the good work. Lawnerd rant below, so warning in advance. The Monotone rule is actually no longer the test in most US states, as I stated, having been replaced by a new model, the Penal Code in 1972. Of course, it is not a standard rule and must be specifically incorporated into laws of each state, but it seems as a better test by many jurisdictions. Logan goes on to say one of the issues with the Monotone rule is that it does largely fall into a simpler argument, a larger argument of mens rea. And then goes on to say, you can quickly see, after they say a lot, you can quickly see the Monotone rule falls very closely to the mens rea test in that it requires you to be aware of your actions in many cases. Being able to demonstrate the Monotone test would also allow you to demonstrate a lack of mens rea, or choice in the matter and what you're doing. It might be even easier because there are no moral questions. Wow, you're right. There was a lot of legal talk in there. And I know that we are a bit outside of our science comfort zone for this one. What I really did want to get at was all the determinism, free will, biology kind of stuff. But for pointing out my possibly too wide application of the Monotone rule, and I just wanted to use that as a base for what most courts would start considering the Joker under. For pointing out all of that, Logan Oliver, you are indeed a super nerd. And I don't object. Gavel. You got a problem, pal? Exhibit A, Exhibit B. You want to have a gavel? But moving right along to this week's episode. This week's episode of Because Science is just how powerful is a Falcon Punch? That's right, in this week's episode, we are getting to one of the most famous fighting moves in all of video games and trying to figure out just how fast a fist would have to fly to create flames and ignite on your face. Another F word. Nope. No. And what would it feel like when that fist hit your face? It's 3, 2, 1. Figure it out. In a couple days, we'll do that. But before we put maths to flying fists, please go watch the latest episode of Because Science, all about the Joker and his criminal insanity or not, if you haven't yet, and leave me all of your best, nerdiest comments, corrections, and legal statutes at youtube.com/becausescience, facebook.com/becausescience, and at becausescience, wherever you can type that in and find something. And don't forget, I know the free will thing is kind of scary and might shake up your thinking a little bit, but I incorporate it into my life this way. If you can truly come to terms with the fact that you could not have chosen otherwise in the past, it might be able to alleviate some feelings of regret for some actions, for some events that you may constantly find yourself pulled back towards, almost magnetically. When you're having a good day, you remember something you did wrong. When you're having a great part of your life, you remember something that went terribly. If you remind yourself that you could not have chosen otherwise, you realize that the only way forward is to move forward. You made that choice. You were always going to make that choice. You have no option but to continue living your life, and don't let that part of your life rule you in that way anymore. It's a kind of free will and a kind of freedom, even if it's not real. Sure.